Good morning. Welcome to the Atlantic Council for a session with Polish Finance Minister Andrzej Domański. To introduce, I want to talk about how Polish economists saved the free world. In 1989, Poland's solidarity movement outnegotiated the communists, won an election, and formed a government. Now, that was supposed to be impossible. But what followed was going to be even harder. The new Polish democratic government had to fix the ruin of the communist economy in Poland. And that was regarded in Washington by the, let us politely say, analytic community and by the Department of Treasury, especially the Department of Treasury, as impossible. It could never be done. And of course, it had never been done. No one had thought about what to do if communism ended and democracy, free market democracy began, except in Poland, where some economists in the 1980s had been thinking about just that thing. And one of them, Leszek Balcerowicz, became Poland's finance minister and planned the most radical possible reforms to take Poland from the ruins of communism to a free market democracy. And Washington was very skeptical. I remember, I do remember. Poland couldn't do it. It couldn't be done. If the Poles tried, they would fail, or they'd probably compromise, and they'd come up with some weak plan, which was basically social democracy. The whole thing would be a ruin. But the Balcerowicz plan was radical. It was thorough, but it depended on one big thing. It involved lifting all the restrictions, all the communist restrictions on the economy, and then hoping that Poles would stand up and make a free economy work. That was a big bet. And the second hope was that Polish politics would carry the country through the rough period of transition to the other side when the economy started to grow. And it worked. It worked. The shock was tremendous. Shock therapy got a bad name in the world. But in fact, in Poland, it was a spectacular success. By 1992, the Polish economy was beginning to grow. By the mid-90s, it was growing at Chinese levels, but without Chinese-style politics. It was a democracy. Polish society turned out to be very good at business, at figuring out how to get things done, at entrepreneurship. Poland was, in 1989, a poor country. Today, it is not a poor country. There are poor people in it, but it is not a poor country. This is a miracle. Now, why am I bringing up history? I do so because we are dealing with the same set of issues today. Had Poland failed in its economic transformation, there would be no EU enlargement, there would have been no NATO enlargement, and Poland, the Baltic states, the rest of Central and Eastern Europe probably would be stuck in some kind of a gray zone because NATO and the EU would not have enlarged to take in countries that were failing. But they didn't fail. They didn't fail because Polish economists leading the way showed that radical transformation was possible. Putin, Russia's President Vladimir Putin, wants his empire back. He has started multiple wars, 2 against Ukraine, 1 against Georgia, to get it back. And the Kremlin propaganda machine is threatening more wars. To stand against him, there is Ukraine. And behind Ukraine, there is what we used to call the free world. The free world is stronger and larger because 100 million Europeans from the Baltic to the Black Sea joined it, and they were led politically by Poland and the Solidarity movement, and economically by the radical economic reforms of Leszek Balcerowicz. The Poles didn't do it alone. All the other countries in Central and Eastern Europe implemented variants of what the Poles did. But the Polish reforms were the most successful, the most dramatic, the most far-reaching, and they were the first. Now, that's a lot of legacy, but we are dealing with the same set of issues now. Will Ukraine survive? And after the war, will Ukraine be able to transform itself the way Poland did, join the EU, join NATO, because NATO has said that is Ukraine's future? That depends on security. That depends on the United States doing what it needs to do and help Ukraine with weapons. And it will depend on good economic policies to transform the country. Poland has a lot to say. And Andrzej Domański is of the 21st century generation of Polish leaders who's going to take Poland and hopefully help a free Ukraine to join Europe, the transatlantic community, and the larger free world. That is the context for this discussion, so it is a pleasure to welcome the Finance Minister to Washington, and I will turn the floor over to my Atlantic Council colleagues and to the Finance Minister for a discussion, and thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Fried, for that very moving introduction. We are with one such Polish economist, though I think he's a little too young to have been part of the generation that started those reforms, but you are their heir, you carry that legacy, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. So thank you for finding the time to talk to us during this very busy week in Washington. I thought I'd start with a question on that. This is your first time in Washington as Polish Finance Minister. I believe it's actually your first time in Washington, but could you tell us what you've been trying to achieve this week and what your impressions are?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. It is my first time in Washington, and it was extremely busy couple of days. We had plenty of meetings with investors, with leaders of U.S. corporations, and my strong feeling is, and the message that I received from them is that Poland is on the roll, that people notice the big change that happened on October 15th in Poland.
This was the election.
The election date. I say that we make a U-turn from what I call a Hungarian path, which is out of the European values, and right now Poland is back to Europe, and I'm really glad that both CEOs of companies, investors notice that Polish currency is one of the strongest in the world since the election in my country. Stock market went by 25% up, and we see that there is lots of interest in Poland right now.
Thank you very much, Minister. We will talk about the domestic Polish economy first. Growth was still quite slow last year. I think your economy recovered very fast from the pandemic, but then growth was a little bit slow last year, and now it's predicted to be quite fast this year, 2.7%. So quite a lot of volatility in growth numbers. The currency, as you were saying, has appreciated. So I was wondering if we could go into a little more detail on the factors behind this. Growth, slow last year, accelerating this year, and appreciating currency. How do you deal with those dynamics?
Actually, last year we have no growth, like 0.2. This is nothing. So we are really happy that this year economy is really accelerating. We expect the GDP to grow by 3% this year, and then further accelerate in 2025 to 3.7, maybe 4%. So Polish economy came back to where it's placed, to the fastest growing European economy. And it's worth to notice that we achieve it only, so far, we achieve it only thanks to one engine, which is consumption. Still, we are waiting for the pickup in investments. We have some early signs that those investments will start to rise in the second half of this year. And of course, will accelerate further in 2025. And the strength of Polish currency, of course, is a kind of a problem for Polish exporters. But I think that the sluggish recovery of European economy, Eurozone economy, is more a problem. Fortunately, our economy is very well diversified. We don't have one sector that would be overwhelming the whole economy. and I believe this is one of the factors that is behind our resilience. Actually, since the start of the Polish transformations at the beginning of 90s, we have only 1 year when we had a negative GDP growth. And even during the world financial crisis, we managed to have a growth.
Yes, so you were the only country in Central Eastern Europe to buck the trend and not have a recession during the global financial crisis. Most people think that's due to the size of the Polish economy, the Polish internal market, so consumption, what you were just mentioning. But what do you think are the factors that undermined the attractiveness for investment over the past few years? You say you see signals of green shoots, investments coming back, but why do you think there's been a change of perception?
I mean, as I said, our economy is going to accelerate. We have a very well diversified economy. We have plenty of well-educated young people. Still, our unit labor costs are 70% lower than in Western European countries. We do benefit heavily from friendshoring and nearshoring processes. Poland is located at the very center of the European Union, so I would say it's the best place to invest in Europe right now.
And you've also set up quite a lot to do with the green energy transition. So moving away from coal has been set out as a priority by your government. How do you plan on financing this? I know there's a mix of European funds, but also private investment and domestic funds. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more.
Right now, we have nearly 70% of our energy produced out of coal. And this is not only the disaster for the climate, but it's also unsustainable from the perspective of Polish industry. We know that the prices on ETS market went down, but still it's a big burden for Polish industry. And therefore we need to accelerate green energy transition. And there are the two obvious directions, which one of them is renewables, and the second one, nuclear energy. It will take time, but we are prepared, and we will have financing coming from European funds. This Monday we received the biggest payment from European Union in our history in European Union. It's 7 billion euro out of RRF fund, and we will use nearly 50% of RRF fund to finance the green energy transition.
And this is a grant, not a loan.
There are two parts.
Yes.
There are two parts, grants and loan parts. Of course, as a Minister of Finance, I do prefer grants over loans. However, we will prefer to we'll use both of them. The most important,
reasonable, balanced approach, one can only understand.
The most important for me is to use this money wisely.
Yes.
Because it's not a problem to spend money. The most important is to spend those money in a manner that will fuel Polish economy, not in a matter of 1 or 2 quarters, but in a matter of decades. Yes, and we definitely need to invest in green energy transition. And let's be honest here, we must also invest in our defense industry as we face the growing threat from Russia aggression on Ukraine. And currently Poland spends 4.1% of our GDP on defense. This is of course a huge burden for our budget, but we think it's right decision. We are convincing our European partners that they should increase their spending because some countries don't even touch the 2% level that is demanded by NATO. So the investments in defense industry is the second priority.
Absolutely. We will come back to this question specifically because Poland will have the presidency of the Council very soon, and so that might be one of the priorities for your presidency. But given we're partly hosted by the Europe Centre, but also the Geo-Economic Centre of the Atlantic Council, so we do quite like to go into detail on how the finances of a country works. And I think for some of our audience who may not have been following, one of the reasons why a lot of European funds are coming to Poland now is that they were stopped for a little while under the previous government, and you've managed to restore relations with Brussels to the extent that that money is coming back. So it was to do with rule of law issues, and some of them are still being resolved, but the money is flowing again. So you mentioned 7 billion, but I think in the totality will be in excess of 100 billion. So green transition is one priority. But you mentioned that your main priority as the finance minister is that this is spent appropriately and in ways that you can actually see their effects for investment in Poland. So could you tell us a little bit more about how the Polish government directs this money, how you choose projects? We'd be very interested in hearing what the process is.
Okay, so first of all, we lost as a country 2 years because this RRF fund was started more than 2 years ago. Quite recently, there was an ECOFIN meeting where there was
European finance ministers.
Yes, in Brussels, and there was a discussion about what works well, what works poorly, and my friends from Italy, Spain, Germany were discussing how it works at their country.
Arguing, perhaps?
Arguing, and I had nothing to say because we just received the money, and it's a huge waste of time, and it will be very, very costly for us as a country. So coming back to your question, of course, green energy transition is priority number one. We will invest also heavily in infrastructure, education, as we believe that in the long term, investing in education is a great investment, and there are a lot of papers supporting it, showing how well investment in education pay off, for example, for Nordic countries. One of the first decisions of this government, of our government, was to rise the salaries of teachers in Poland, because they were really their salaries were really poor. So we want to invest in infrastructure, education, health system to some extent, and how to spend those money wisely. We need, as I said, we have very limited time. We are in the discussion to extend the program, but now we have to be very, very effective in spending those money. So we are working together with local governments because they are closer to people. They really know how to invest those money, so the local communities will benefit most of it.
Thank you. I think it would be a good idea now just to mention some of the recommendations made within the World Economic Outlook for Poland. This is the Spring Meetings Week, so I had the opportunity to have a look at them. Very interesting to hear that you have these investment plans and that you're raising salaries, very understandable for teachers. However, what I thought I'd put to you was some of the suggestions from the IMF about the Polish economy, and they do suggest that a fiscal expansion at this stage is something that you need to be cautious about. They also mention on monetary policy that tightening measures should resume. I know that you're not the central bank governor, you're a finance minister, but they mention regarding monetary policy that inflation should remain, reining in inflation should remain a priority, and if necessary, it may include some interest rate hikes. So what's your reaction to these recommendations?
First of all, I'm a Minister of Finance and I'm not interfering with monetary policy. The CPI in March was 2%, so the lowest in 5 years. So I would say that inflation is under control. It will probably rebound slightly in the second half of the year because of the base effects, also some changes in tax system. But I would say it's under control. So I'm not giving any recommendation to Monetary Policy Council, to Central Bank.
That's their business.
Their business.
And on the fiscal side?
And on the fiscal side, of course, we do our best. We are in the dialogue with the European Commission. We know there is this excess deficit procedure that probably would be open for Poland as well as for other 12 or 13 European countries. We do believe that our deficit, which was 5.1 in 2023, to a huge extent was caused by the war in Ukraine. As I said, we spent 4.1% of our GDP on defense. We spent nearly 1 percentage point of our GDP on helping Ukrainian guests that came to Poland after the brutal Russian aggression. Another 0.8, 0.9 that were spent on fighting with the crisis on the energy markets. We need to
So you needed
support,
to subsidize
households. So it was costly, but I would say we really had to do that, and now we are in a dialogue with the European Commission to convince them that those times are really special, and that the recommendation from the excess deficit procedure, if any, should be really, really mild.
There's another argument playing in your favor in that discussion, of course, which is your debt burden, which is quite a bit lower than the European average.
Absolutely. We have right now debt level at the 54% of our GDP, so way lower than many European countries. And as you rightly said, this is an important argument that our fiscal position is stable. And of course, we are ready to make some fiscal effort in the following years, but we will not cut spending on defense. We will not stop helping our Ukrainian friends.
Understood. So if we could talk about the presidency of the Council of the European Union, which you're preparing for. You take it up at the beginning of 2025, so in less than a year. By then, we will know what the results of the US election will be as well, so I think that might inform some of the priorities. But without wanting to dwell on that too much, what do you think the priorities will be, especially as finance minister? I think there's actually a very interesting link between defense policy and your interest or your remit of finance, not just in providing 4% of your GDP as a budget for defense, but also at a European level. There is a lack of funds. It's not just the domestic problems, domestic limitations, but Europe-wide. There have been ideas about helping Ukraine directly now that funding from the US is less certain. Where does the money come from? Some people talk about issuing bonds, common debt issuance at a European level, which may help all of this go faster. Very diverse opinions within the European Union. I had the pleasure of interviewing your Irish counterpart at this very table a few days ago, and they are quite skeptical. So I was wondering if that idea might be one of your priorities, common debt issuance for defense, and what other priorities might be for the for the Polish presidency of the European Council.
As for me, we will take the presidency January 2025. So we'll have European election before election in US, and it's worth to notice that before us the presidency will be held by Hungary. So our priorities, for sure, one of them will be security. Yes, and we have to find a solution to invest more in European defense industry and to make to have more European solidarity in terms of defense spending. So this will be one of the priorities. The second one, competitiveness. Europe is the rebound of Eurozone economy is, let me say it, very sluggish.
Why do you think that is?
There are probably many reasons. Also what's happening in China, that hits German economy, and lack of competitiveness in other European countries. So we have to focus on that. We have to make our economies more vital, I would say, and this would be the priority number 2. And I believe that our European partners see it very similar. Maybe the tools that should be used to achieve this better level of competitiveness could be seen differently in different European capitals, but we'll try to find a compromise, to find a common solution. Let me say, for example, about the common financial markets. Yes, it's hard to find compromise between the biggest European economies and the smaller ones, as like every country wants to have its own stock market, for example. But I believe that there are some issues that we can and we will make a step forward.
Very interesting. If I could press you, so very interesting to hear that competitiveness will be another priority, and it's true, a lot of European economies do need a bit of a competitiveness boost, so very good news to hear that that's a priority. But if I could press you again on defense spending. You say security will be a priority for your presidency, for reasons that I think everyone will understand. But a big part of that is just funding, financing, putting more money into this, more money into the sector, perhaps potentially buying weapons for Ukraine. So how would you fund it?
Okay, to some extent, we'll of course need to find a place in our budget. That's for sure. We are trying to convince.
But at a European level?
At the European level, we are in a discussion with European Investment Bank to extend their financing of not only dual-use, so-called dual-use equipment. We are searching
defense companies too.
Sorry?
To extend it to defense companies.
Yes, extend it to the defense companies. Well, I will for sure have a discussion with friends from Germany or France that they also need to dip maybe into their pockets and find more money to finance it.
Actually, yes, I suppose we can commend also the revival of the Weimar Triangle. It's another beneficial effect of Poland's more friendly stance to the European Union in general, but in particular relations with Germany are slightly better, and there have been instances in the past few weeks and months where it's actually been Warsaw helping Berlin and Paris get along, which has been nice to see. So this brings us to the end of our interview. Thank you very much, Minister, for finding the time in your busy schedule.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it also brings us to the end of all of our public meetings this week at the Atlantic Council. It's been a bit of a whirlwind, a marathon, as we've met, I think, over 30 central bank governors, ministers, and other specialists who've been in Washington to talk about development, to talk about competitiveness, to talk about funding defense. It's been a very, very interesting week, and one for which a lot of our colleagues have put in a lot of effort. And that's all of our colleagues in the communications part of the Atlantic Council, in operations, in AV, of course our own Geoeconomic Center, which has worked very hard and put together all these wonderful briefing packages that have allowed me to ask questions that make sense. Also we want to thank our partners in the centers, the 16 programs and centers of the Atlantic Council, some geographic, some thematic. I think most all of them have helped them put this wonderful week together, which has been truly very interesting and very exciting for all of us. Another exciting new departure or venture this week is that we've in fact had 2 studios. This is one of them, and the other has been on the IMF premises. Thank you to the IMF for hosting us. And it's been very exciting to be able to go to and fro from both of them, have panels there and then some sessions here. It's really been wonderful, and we look forward to seeing all of you in October for the annual meetings, which will be back in Washington. So thank you to everyone who's made it possible, and there truly are many of them, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you.